he says, that's a slur, not an argument. And once he said that, I realized, oh my God, that is exactly what has been happening to me. I've been saying some pretty provocative things, beginning with an Atlantic article with Greg Lukianoff, and I keep looking on the internet for people who will respond to it, and pretty much nobody's arguing against me for anything I say. But I do get a lot of people basically saying, I'm a white male, or I somehow am winking at racism, something like that. So young people who go through these colleges, they're exposed to a rhetorical training that prevents them from learning how to engage. They're trained carefully in how to basically discredit your opponent. Slur. Right. They learn to slur. They do not learn to argue. The key to the new morality is a method of looking at society and looking in terms of power and privilege. But there's a bad kind, which is to train students, to train young people to say, let's divide everybody up by their race and gender and other categories. We'll assign them moral merit based on their level of privilege is bad and victimhood is good. Okay, now let's look at everything through this lens. Israel, the Palestinians are the victims. So therefore, they are the good, and the Jews, or the Israelis, are the bad. Right. And then so it's this one totalizing perspective. All social problems get reduced to this simple framework. I think we're doing them a disservice. I think we're actually making students less wise.
You are a liberal.
I am.
We obviously have different politics, but it doesn't matter. On freedom of speech, we are completely united. Do you feel right now, ideologically, not personally, ideologically, your biggest enemy are conservatives or the left?
Oh, there's no question. A, my biggest enemies are the hard left. B, the hard left poses a far greater danger to the American future than the hard right. I'm not worried about a few dozen people with swastikas who want to replace the Jews, because they're our past. They have no resonance on university campuses today.
Right.
But the hard left, anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, intolerance for speech, it's the future. These are our leaders. When I used to teach 150 students in my first year of criminal law, I'd look around and I'd say, future president, future chief justice, future editorial director of the New York Times, future managing partner of Goldman Sachs. They're our future. And that's why we have to worry much more about what's going on university campuses than in Charlottesville.
So what is with the typical professor? Is he weak? Well, how do you explain the lack of opposition to the left on the campus?
In 50 years of teaching at Harvard, Stanford, NYU, Hebrew University, you name it, I have never met a group of less courageous people in my whole life
I love them.
Than tenured Harvard and tenured other professors. They are so terrified of their own shadow. They don't want to do anything that upsets a student.
Right.
They want their student evaluations to be very, very high. They want to be admitted to all the academic societies and clubs. I have been blackballed from numerous of these organizations. I was the most highly regarded classroom teacher for years at Harvard until I started making these points, and then groups of students attacked my ratings. They would give me 0, 0, 0, 0 in order to punish me for expressing my views.
When I became a historian back in the 1980s in Oxford and then in Cambridge, it was generally accepted that there could be conservative historians and liberal historians and socialist historians and then some Marxist historians. It was really quite a heterogeneous community, Oxbridge, in those days. But in the course of my career, what has happened has been that one history department after another has moved steadily and relentlessly to the monochrome left. And it has become steadily harder to be seen as a conservative. I say seen as because I've never really felt that I'm a conservative, but I've often been described as one. Yeah. To be seen as a conservative historian has become steadily harder and harder. And as a result, the culture war, to use your phrase, in the universities has been won by the left. There will really be soon a handful left of conservatives at institutions like Harvard and Stanford. And that's, to me, deeply depressing, deeply troubling. But what happened is, and it's happened in most departments, in most universities, inexorably the left took over, and an implicit rule, a tacit rule, was imposed that one does not hire right-leaning historians, nor does one hire their graduate students. So they too, people who have been my graduate students, have found it difficult to get hired. And now, I think pretty soon, there just won't be conservatives in university departments. More importantly than that, nobody will be teaching subjects like the history of the Soviet Union. So no students will be taught about the crimes of Lenin and Stalin. And students, like the students I taught yesterday, will not hear from anybody that there was a religious motivation to the 9/11 attacks. I had a class at Stanford yesterday. I was allowed to sit in and teach somebody else's class as a guest professor, and it happened to be a discussion about 9/11. And it became clear to me that the students had never considered the possibility that there was a religious motivation to the 9/11 attacks, and more or less accepted the idea that they were retaliation for the misdeeds of US foreign policy in the Middle East, what I'll call the Howard Zinn theory. And since Howard Zinn's books are more widely read in the United States than anybody else's history books, we therefore arrive at a situation in which there will be nobody in any major university saying, actually, Howard Zinn is completely wrong, and this is not what 9/11 was about. So that's what I find depressing. When I